Hi, I'm Danny Elliott, and this is First Time for Everything, a podcast where I talk with really interesting people from all walks of life about their first time doing something. These people started out just like you and me, interested in something and wanting to try it. Maybe they were a little scared, but something in them made them take that leap towards their dream. I hope these conversations inspire you to step out of your comfort zone and go after whatever it is you've been wanting to do. And who knows, maybe we'll be talking about your first time on here soon. So alive, when I dream in color. Let's go! Oh, wow. Today we're talking with super talented, certified holistic chef Laura Lea Bryant. I've only started to get to know Laura Lea recently, and I've already come to see what a thoughtful, intelligent, kind, hardworking, we could be here all day with superlatives kind of woman she is. I first came across Laura Lea online when I began my journey to healing my thyroid after having had Hashimoto's for years. Her recipes gave me some of the foundational education I used as a launching pad to learn more about taking better care of myself by being thoughtful about what I put in my body and, most importantly, enjoying the process. Her recipes will make you basically want to only make her food ever again. Recently, Laura Lea has been sharing more about her life outside of food on her social media, specifically about changes she's grown through the last few years. We talk about how to become friends with change through releasing control, listening to our bodies, and stepping into who we truly are. I thought this would be a great topic for an episode because, hey, most likely we can all learn how to weather change more gracefully. This is First Time Getting Comfortable with Change with Laura Lea Bryant. All right, today we have Laura Lea Bryant. I am so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for just taking the time to chat with me. As I've told you, I've been such a fan of your books for a while. I made the anti-inflammatory eggs for myself for breakfast this morning. So.
Oh, that's so cool. Oh,
yeah. So listen, could you just tell the people a little bit about yourself, a little that background breakdown?
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. This is
Of
so
course.
fun. Always fun to make a connection with someone and make a new friend through something work related. So I love that. Yeah. So my name is Laura Lea. I'm a certified holistic chef from Nashville. And I got my degree from a school called the Natural Gourmet Institute in 2013. And it's funny because I've now been doing this for almost a decade, and I feel like I know less and less what I do as time goes on, but I'm also more comfortable with that and more comfortable with kind of the natural chaos that comes with it. But really, I mean, the overarching theme is I try to bridge the gap between what people think of as healthy cooking and eating and a lot of the stereotypes and negative connotations about it, and kind of bridge the gap between that and then, just fast food, comfort food, takeout, all of these things that are great in moderation. But if we can find like a happy medium, it's kind of ideal.
I also agree with that wholeheartedly. Like the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, this thing I thought I knew so much about, I am realizing that there's a lot of humility to be learned in the process of aging, and just realizing that there's so much I don't know. There is more, of course, we're always accumulating knowledge, right? But there's so much that we totally don't know too. But yeah, so I guess speaking of things that we don't know, changes, today we're going to talk about getting comfortable with change and what that's looked like for you. But you were talking about going to school in New York. Like, what made you decide you wanted to move from here to go to school in New York, and then subsequently after that process, like move back to Tennessee?
Yeah, so I went to school in Virginia. That's where I went to college, and there is this like huge move from Virginia up to New York almost every year. There's a huge group that graduates and moves up to the city.
Really?
And I had a ton of friends who were moving up to New York. So I actually moved there 5 years before I went to culinary school, thinking that I was going to be a lawyer. that was my trajectory at the time. And I got a job as a paralegal in the city back in 2008, and very quickly like just knew that it was not for me, was really unhappy, and also immediately knew that the city wasn't really right for me. But I was there and I didn't want to come back to Nashville without some idea of what I wanted to do. So I really spent the next 4 years struggling quite a bit. And that's really what catalyzed going to culinary school. I was doing this kind of legal and compliance job for 4 years and just miserable. I was really unhappy and really anxious. I struggle with anxiety a lot. And it just got worse and worse. And finally, after about 4 years of, partying and the boozy brunches and
I know them well. I've been many a boozy brunch in New York.
yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a
Yes.
whole and it's not like there's nothing wrong with that, but as a lifestyle, it can be really hard on you. And I think for me, I didn't understand the relationship between food and mental health. I only knew the relationship between food and our aesthetic. And so really, it just took about 4 years of doing the wrong thing to get to a very low point. I had a really unhealthy, controlling relationship with food. It was just something I could control. And it was a very like calories in, calories out, low fat, fat free, all that kind of thing. And I just got to a really like low breaking point and decided to ask for help. And my parents sent me to a food therapist, and I just knew that I appreciated her help, but I just knew what she was talking about, which was just increase your calories and not talking about the substance of the food, that wasn't the right fit either. So that's kind of when I took this into my own hands and started doing a ton of my own research. And that's when I discovered some of these early food people that no one seems to really talk about anymore. But this woman named Angela had a blog called Oh She Glows. And then Kimberly Snyder was doing plant-based food in California. And they were talking about this. And I was just completely enamored with that concept and started cooking for myself and just felt so much better inside and out. And then one day I Googled healthy cooking schools, and I actually don't know I'm sure there's more now, but there were two in the country that I could find that were like actually nationally accredited chefs training programs. And one of them was in Chelsea, where I ended up going to school, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
It's so interesting how we kind of find ourselves on these journeys. The relationship I've built with food that sounds really similar to the relationship that you built with food also for me stemmed from like thyroid issues and having to what you're sounding like to kind of be your own advocate and be like, okay, what is it that I truly need and how do I find that, which can feel so overwhelming and like where do I start? But it really is just like you ask the internet a question and then it starts leading you down these different paths, and before you know it you're like, okay, I think this is maybe the place I'm supposed to go.
No, I certainly don't wish any health concerns upon anyone. And I've told you a little bit about this before we started, but for me, my anxiety is mostly dormant during the day most of the time, and it shows up for me at night in insomnia. And I have really struggled with that for the last 15 to 18 years. And I'll be honest, it's not cured. It's still something, it's still something I struggle with to this day, but my capacity to take care of myself and live my life and control what I can control is vastly different. And just the symptoms of it, when I was really struggling and drinking too much and not taking care of myself and anxious, I was having heart palpitations. I felt really depressed, and even just physically had different things going on. And it's like, yeah, we can only control what we can control. We're all born with a certain set of struggles that we navigate, but learning how you can make food work for you inside, like internally, mentally, and physically is just really powerful.
Yeah, I feel like your books were like one of the first catalysts for me too to start thinking about food differently as like a way of starting to like heal myself, because I also had the same experience in New York. It was like you're go 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 all the time, so you're not truly being like very mindful, or it takes a lot of energy to be mindful just about like the life choices you're making. And so for me also, I was like, whatever, I've had this thyroid issue since I was 21. I take a pill every day, whatever, it's fine. And I didn't realize how exhausted I was or how emotionally I was all over the place until we actually moved down to Nashville and I had the space to actually evaluate my life and be like, whoa, actually, I have not been thriving. I've actually been struggling. I've been in survival mode. I'm not taking care of my body in the way that I actually thought I was taking care of it. And a lot of changes need to be made. And yeah, like your books and finding the right team of doctors and people to help me on that journey have really helped kind of turn that around and again not looking at food as so much as something as an aesthetic, I don't know, tool, even though of course it does affect that, but more as like a tool for mental health. Because similar, like alcohol can make me anxious, sugar for sure can make me really anxious. If I'm having too much dairy or gluten, like that can do that too, which then affects like my coping mechanisms for how I can get through life. And I again, like the topic of today, just like dealing with change. I also was like really in a really tumultuous industry, which is the music industry, and there's so much change all the time. And I realized I wasn't able to cope with it either because my mental health wasn't right, in part because of the food I was putting in my body. And so, do you feel like that kind of affected you in any way too? Like just the coping skills of once you got the food on point, did you feel like it in turn helped you just kind of have better coping mechanisms for the anxiety?
Yeah, it's an interesting fine line because I do think control is what kind of got me in trouble in the first place, a desire to control. And there is an element of the more information you have about food, the more you can kind of control how you feel. So I think not letting it control you and you being the one who's sort of like taking that knowledge and using it to the best of your ability, I think is really important. And I think for me, one of the things is, when I graduated 9 years ago, I felt like I had all the answers. I really did. And I was super strict about, like not putting anything that wasn't healthy into my body, although that's actually totally arbitrary. I mean, there's some things that are pretty inarguable, but for the most part, there's a lot of flexibility with what healthy means. And I think so much of what I've done in the last 4 years, I got divorced 4 years ago, and it was the first time where I just didn't care enough about since I graduated and become this like certified holistic chef, and I kind of like had to step off my pedestal and I had to just live. So it was the first time where I felt like I was, let's see, eating to live, not living to eat. And that was actually the last kind of missing piece in my food journey, because I went from this really bad relationship with food before culinary school, graduated from culinary school with a bit of a holier than thou attitude about it and very strict. And then I did that even while I was writing my first cookbooks. Those years, I still had some kind of food rules that I lived by that weren't the healthiest. My body was a lot healthier and my brain was a lot healthier too, because I was just putting in good food, but it was just too strict. And so then after my divorce, I just didn't care for a minute, and it actually helped me create a bit more homeostasis. So I think it's always a fine line with how we cope using food. I think it's important to know what works for our bodies to feel our best, but it's also important to remember that sometimes indulging, sometimes having a cocktail, sometimes, getting a sonic blast or whatever it is, that are very sort of objectively unhealthy might, in the context of everything else, be fine.
Yeah, that's such a good point for sure. And I feel like it's taken me a minute to kind of recognize that in myself too. Like it's not just about like stripping things away and having this sort of like limited, like, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't put this in your body. It's like, okay, what also is like life-giving and brings you joy in moderation? Like how do you walk that line, And I think I'm sure it's different for everyone and how they kind of get to that place, or it's probably also kind of always evolving.
It's, I think that's where it really comes down to first learning how to listen to your body and trust yourself, because most of the time our bodies will tell us when we've reached that threshold of indulgence. I had a very indulgent weekend this weekend. I had like multiple birthday parties, and it was like pizza and sliders and milkshakes and all this stuff. And it was really fun and I enjoyed it. And I truly, I have such a healthy relationship with food now. I don't make up like stories about what I choose means. I think that's so much of how we get ourselves in trouble is and I think one of the most common things I hear from women in particular is once I start, I can't stop, or I don't have any control. I just open the cabinet and the entire sleeve of Oreos is gone. But really, it's not really, that's not really what's going on. What's really going on is that our brain is making up stories about what those choices mean. So we start and we have an Oreo and immediately our brain say, oh, well, I'm off the wagon, so I might as well eat the whole sleeve of Oreos and tomorrow I'll be good, right?
Yes.
But the truth is, it's not even that we really want all the Oreos. I mean, yes, there are some addicting qualities to food, but I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for our ability to change our thoughts about food and thereby change the way that we handle it. So, years ago, if I'd been presented with a weekend like the one I just had, I probably would have been like, well, I'm not going to have a weekend like this for a really long time. So I'm going to have all the pizza and all the curly fries and all the burgers and whatever. But instead it was like, I'm just going to have what I feel like having, and I don't need like more than that. And also it has nothing to do with what I choose today, other than what my body is saying. So it's not about what I eat today is not about stories about what that food meant. It's listening to my body, and my body is like, okay, you could really do with some vegetables and some fruit today and some hydration. And it's completely physical as opposed to, like making meaning out of something that is truly like neutral.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done a lot of work on yourself in this in this field, like really spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I recognize that because I don't feel like I've necessarily done it directly in regards to food, but I've done it in some other like emotional areas of my life, and I know how much work it takes to get to this place to talk yourself down off that ledge. The sleeve of Oreos is a great example. Like sometimes there's not like a deeper meaning. It just like you just
Right.
did it.
And leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, leave it there for sure. But yeah, I mean, in terms of doing that work on yourself, I know we are going to talk about some of the tools that you have kind of like acquired in your tool belt of having gone through the divorce. But like, are there any other things you want to talk about in terms of things that led you to be able to develop this tool set you have to be able to cope with these changes and not necessarily fall back into detrimental mental habits or responses?
Yeah. I mean, it's still a work in progress, I will say, but I think something that is important to keep in mind is just that it always is. And the tools are just that the reason we have tools is because things will come up and then we use them to help us mitigate those or heal from them or do things a little bit differently. Even if it's 1 degree, your response is 1 degree healthier than it was before. So it's like that's why they're tools. It's not, I'm magically some,
Yep.
fixed person, but
Yeah.
so I got divorced and then I had 2 relationships pretty much back to back that the first one, I'm not actually, I try to be very careful not to go into too much detail, but basically about a year ago today, I moved out from a boyfriend's house, and it was the second person I had dated post-divorce. So we're talking 3 breakups in 3 years, essentially. One of them was a divorce. And I moved out of his house, and I just felt like a complete and utter failure. And I felt like a failure, but on some level, I knew I wasn't a failure. And so very similarly to when I decided to stop going the party route in New York, it got so bad where that was really like my food stuff. This was really like my personal life stuff. It got so bad that I had to do something different. And because my divorce was so amicable and we both knew it was the right thing for us, I think I never fully processed it like, oh, I'm okay because I think it was the right thing. It wasn't like super traumatic. No one did anything horrible to someone else. So I never processed my divorce. And then I masked all of that with relationships. So I chose relationships that weren't right for me. And that's what we do. We attract someone who reflects how we actually see ourselves. And that truly is still a work in progress for me, those vulnerabilities and triggers. But I decided to do something differently. So that was about a year ago. And I did 2 things. One, I signed a lease in Asheville, North Carolina, which is like my home away from home. And I decided that I was going to move there from May to October and just be there and take a ton of time by myself and be in the mountains. And then I also invested in a coach. And I was really resistant to the idea of coaching because I think it has this kind of cheesy reputation. But I knew this woman and I knew several people she had worked with, and I had watched their transformations, and she and I really clicked, and I knew she was the right person for me. And I will tell you, and I love therapy. Therapy is really helpful, in my opinion, for understanding why and understanding our childhood and why we are the way we are today. Therapy has not been as helpful for me about what we do about that and how we actually create change going forward. And that's the difference between coaching and therapy. Coaching is present. Coaching really doesn't, the coach doesn't care about the why. And she honestly doesn't care about my past, and she doesn't care about my story. I mean, she cares, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
And so learning, and her whole philosophy is based off of, there are several people who have created these thought models and this concept that our thoughts create our results ultimately. And it's true. I mean, it really is. And that's obviously barring pain and grief and like there's a time and a place. She doesn't try to thought work you out of pain,
Sure.
but she does help you understand what the way that you're thinking about yourself and every aspect of your life is what can keep you stuck and making decisions that aren't right for you. So doing that work intensively, which I still do, I just re-upped with her for another year, totally changed my life.
Amazing. I had never thought about coaching versus therapy in those ways, like therapy being the why and coaching being the how do you then move forward. Learning that, okay, like feelings are not facts, and moving forward through that and being able to just cope with all of the things in life a little bit better because you're like, okay, not everything is personal, not everything is something like really deep all the time.
Right.
you know, we can move through these things. But I'm so glad that you had such a good experience with her. I actually recommended your coach to a friend of mine who's going through like a tough breakup and has kind of been noticing these patterns in herself too, and was like, this friend of mine had this great experience with this coach. Maybe she'll work for you too. So I'll let you know if she she
Yeah, do. And I think coaching is just like therapy. It's so personal. You have to find the right person for you. But yeah, it's really powerful. And yeah, it's an ongoing practice, and we have to prioritize it. And I think a year ago, I didn't give it enough time and attention. I say this with cooking too, is there's so many things where we know we have to practice them in order to be good at them, like learning a language or an instrument. But we don't do that with, a lot of time we don't do that with cooking. We're either bad cooks or we're good cooks, or we're bad in relationships and we're good in relationships. And there's a lot of parallel there. And so I am, yeah, still continuing to practice it every day.
Yeah, I think also too part of it, and something I talk with my voice students a lot about too, is like deciding that you deserve to put that time into
Mm.
yourself, because I think a lot of it can stem from like worth issues around like, do I deserve to be like taking the time to spend all this money on a coach? I had a breakup, I'll get over it,
Mm.
and not really realizing that maybe you need some like help to get through that, and that's okay. Or with my voice students, it's like, who am I to think I should be taking lessons learning how to sing? People are going to think I'm stupid or full of myself. It's like, well, if that's what feeds your spirit and brings you joy and helps you move through life, then it's actually one of the best investments you can make, and actually realizing that you deserve to have that because
Mhm.
you are just here existing, like trying to get through life.
Exactly. And that's it, totally. That's another thing. It's just that constant reminder that we're all deserving of everything just because we are. And also that our flaws, what makes us human, doesn't also make us unlovable. Those aren't prohibitive or mutually exclusive. And yeah, so much of relationships is just finding, I mean, we all deal with our partner's stuff, and it's just deciding what works for you and what doesn't work for you, what you want to dig your heels in for and what you don't. But it doesn't make you less deserving of love, whatever that, even if you are still in a tough pattern, doesn't mean that you don't deserve to work on it, and also to find somebody who can be patient with you as you move through that.
100%. I mean, as you've been kind of making these realizations, have there been any like specific kind of aha moments that you felt the tide kind of turned and like helped your thinking about these transitions become a bit more easy or just like easier to manage?
I don't know if there was I mean, I definitely think the morning I woke up after moving out in the middle of a snowstorm a year ago, that was a pretty revelatory time for me. I think since then it's much more been, I mean, one of the reasons I did re-up with my coach is because again, it's like, it's more that there are countless moments where I find my brain getting the best of me. And then I just go back to this work with her. And I've made a lot of mistakes in the last year, but just constantly going back to those tools and course correcting. But I definitely think that the biggest thing I realized subconsciously last year was that there were a lot of factors playing on why I was staying in relationships that weren't right for me. Things like my relationship with money, my relationship, I mean, of course, my relationship with myself, and my relationship with having children or not.
Mhm.
And what else? And I think, yeah, my fear of speaking up for myself, all these things that I sort of like systematically eliminated over the last year. And so I have been dating someone very privately. And that was also a big decision. Was I realized I was being very public about my relationships. And so subconsciously I was like, well, I can't have another public breakup,
Or
public, even though it's like my tiny little world, but like to me, it feels big. And
yeah.
so, that was playing on me, was what is my community going to think? And so, since I've been dating someone and just taking it really, really slowly, keeping my life separate, continuing to do my work and really fleshing out my life, and what my coach calls like the process of falling in love with yourself, making sure I'm still doing that and keeping it private. And I froze my eggs, and I made some choices to help me kind of get in a better place financially and more independent, and all of these things that needed to happen because they were showing up in not just who I attracted, because I really don't, it's really not about blaming anybody. It's a two-way street,
Yeah.
right? It's like how we attracted each other.
Totally. I'm always just really impressed by and happy when I hear people talking about really trying to get to the root of what their shit is.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know if this is an American thing or what, but I feel like so much of like our emotional issues and physical issues, it's like just like here's a band-aid for it and keep on trucking. And it's not like, hey, let's actually stop. Let's figure out why we're making these choices. Let's figure out whether they're relationship patterns, food patterns, and really get to the root of why we're continuing to find ourselves in these cycles, and how do we, like you were saying, make that 1% change, and before you know it 1%'s here, but then like a few months from now you've already changed so much, those
Mhm.
little cumulative changes. And also I'm just impressed that like through this whole process of doing this work on yourself, you were able to write a whole e-cookbook on top of that. I think so many people maybe would have been like, I just need to, the time to process, and you were like productive on top of that. Can you tell us about the e-cookbook?
Yeah, it's fun. One of the things my coach says, just like my guru, but one of the things that she talks about too is that timelines don't heal.
Mm.
Our work does. And again, that is really specific, I think, to relationship grief. I think tragedy is in a different category, but I do think when it comes to relationships and healing ourselves, a lot of it's less about the time and more about what we do about it. And so for me, I actually, as painful and devastating as this last breakup was, it was particularly hard. It was one of those where I wasn't out of love when it ended, and that makes it extra hard. And so it's like I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave. So the pain initially was really, really bad, but because I dove into so much of just really consistently, and I did a lot of things which is why I ended up writing my ebook. I did a lot of things that healed me a lot faster, kind of going back to self-care. I stopped drinking. I was like, I'm not even like a glass of wine. I was in the habit of like here and there. It's like, not going to drink. I'm not going to go out and socialize. I had always, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but always like been talking to a guy, and from like even, or not even just talking to a guy, but like as soon as I was single, like thinking like who's out there, and instead I just really tried to obsessively focus on myself and my life, and do things that brought me a lot of joy and spend a lot of time outside, and all of these practices that kind of go against what we want to do when we're heartbroken. We want to go out and party and flirt with somebody and drink our sorrows and lay in bed all day. And I just really used some discipline, isn't really the right word, but the motivation and strength that came from my like why,
Mhm.
rather than willpower,
Yeah.
and the bigger picture, to be consistent with those things. And it helped me so much that when I moved to Asheville, now I will say I had a ton of free time when I was in Asheville. So I think it was easier for me to, I had the mental and emotional bandwidth to like cry a ton, and heal, and also have a lot of joy. It was just like perfect for that. So I was able to write this book and get a lot of that out and share. I just really, really wanted to, I guess, ebook, I'm writing the book currently, but I just really wanted to share some of those little but huge lifestyle things that made a world of difference for me.
It's so funny. I relate with that, your process and that so much because it's a very similar process to how my husband and I got together too. And that I was always kind of like, okay, this breakup is over. What else is out there for me? Because I think I am a serial monogamous too. Like
Mhm.
I want to be in a committed relationship where we're both showing up for each other. And then when I wasn't finding that, I was like, okay, let me continue the search. And it wasn't until I kind of stripped everything away and prioritized myself and started making choices that reflected that and had like a really clear mind
Good.
that it actually like worked for Matt and I was like, oh, okay, I guess gotta try something different to get different results.
Right. Groundbreaking, but it's
Right?
true. It's like we're so good at our patterns, and but obviously, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It's no surprise to me that that's when you met him. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have had your stuff just like every other couple, but when you have, before a year ago, and this is again still a major work in progress. I think growing up as a woman in the South, I really internalized this idea that it was better for me to be diplomatic and PC and like a chameleon and go with the flow. I'll have what they're having. Who do you want me to be? Then
Mm,
that felt safer than asking myself, but who am I really? Because who I actually am, I'm a pretty like dramatic person, but not in a bad way. Like I have strong opinions. I'm very goofy, and I can be really silly and loud, and I can also be really sassy. And I have two
welcome.
complete,
The water's fine.
totally, like I'm very masculine and very feminine, and all these things that are just the reality of who I am. But I was so uncomfortable with those because it
Yeah.
felt like I would get ostracized from this culture that I grew up in if I was that fully. So up until truly a year ago, I had no like internal like stand for myself, like no like solid core to come back and just be like, because we all need to be open to change and being better versions of ourselves, but there are fundamental parts of ourselves that we just have to own and be like, if I'm not going to always get it right, but these things, they're wonderful things, and they're also not always going to be the easiest. And I'm going to keep doing my part, and then finding someone who that fits with. And but if you don't have any idea what that is, what your opinion is, I mean, I just like truly a year ago, like couldn't have even really told you my opinion about things. Like I could have, but I was really afraid to even
Yeah.
ask myself. And I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of women experience that.
It's so interesting because I feel like my relationship things were because I am that person and the partners I was choosing for some reason weren't ready for that either. So
Mhm.
I was like having relationship issues because I am like sassy and direct. I mean, it's like New York, New England.
Yeah.
Like if you are not direct, people are like, this is taking too long. Get to the
Mhm.
point. So when I
Totally.
moved down here, it actually helped me kind of relax a little bit, be like, oh, maybe I don't have to be like so direct all the time. Maybe I
Mhm.
can be a little kinder. But but yeah, it makes sense though when there are parts of ourselves that we're not even aware of. Of course, we're not being reflected back in like a partner who truly sees us,
Mhm.
because they're just seeing what we're letting them see or what we think we're genuinely sharing, even though we haven't really like
Yeah.
uncovered all these other parts of ourselves. But I'm so glad that you discovered that. I think there's so much liberation in being able to like say what it is you need and what you deserve and what you want, and hopefully you feel like that's being reflected back to you in your current relationship, hopefully in your friendships and your family, and like hopefully it's extended to the and business as well too. I feel like it actually makes things easier to be able to say to like a publisher or collaborator, whoever, hey, this is actually what I want to do, and this is my vision for something, and here's what I expect.
Yeah, all of that is like, so yeah, just goes against a lot of my kind of natural inclination, but it's been really fun to practice that and practice being uncomfortable and getting comfortable being uncomfortable, I think has been a huge part of this last year for me as well.
I know you had mentioned on Instagram and when we were talking that you've moved, was it like 5 times in the last year?
Yeah. So when I moved out of my ex's house, that was the start of five homes and four moves in a year. So I moved from his place into an Airbnb for 3 months and then to Asheville and then back to Nashville 3 months ago. And then I sold the apartment that I owned in Nashville and then just moved again a month ago. And that has been wild because I am someone who naturally does not love change. And it's been like the best thing for me to just, yeah, again, just practice moving, practice not needing a place to define me, practice making anywhere home. I mean, I can now make almost any space feel like home. And just, yeah, it's like if you had told me, I'm 36, if you had told me at 26 where my life would be, that I would be a, technically single, unmarried cat lady living in an apartment at 36 with no kids, I would have been like, oh wow, like that sucks for me. But the truth is I love my life and I am so much happier and more confident in this life. This is a much better fit for me than what I thought I wanted, which was the traditional white picket fence,
Mhm.
beautiful house, kids, like all of that just in succession, ultimately was not the right fit for me. And I do think some of my work has been recognizing and taking responsibility for my role in my marriage, because my ex-husband was very consistent about who he was and what he wanted from the beginning, and I was not. I
Mhm.
didn't know. And it took, unfortunately, moving really quickly in that and diving into that to realize it. But it's super cool. And so one of the things I want to do is continue to help women who are getting into their, early 30s to mid 40s, this kind of in between time where you feel like you're supposed to be further along, or you're supposed to be in another place, and realize like you're actually exactly where you're supposed to be, and that you can, with the way that you think about things. It's like I would have thought that this situation was a problem. And now it's like, there's no problem. There's no problem with being divorced. There's no problem with not, having the husband and like 6 kids and just being a cat lady. I'm just looking at my cat and living in an apartment building that has mostly college kids. No problem. Like I don't care. I truly have I love it. I'm proud of it. It's great.
Yeah, I think like learning to trust that process, as cheesy as it sounds, as like therapy-ish as it sounds, it is so freeing because I've done that a lot too. The whole like, oh, I should be in a certain place. I should know what I want by now. I should whatever. And I think that there is so much societal pressure. Again, not to sound so typical, but it's true. I mean, it's like typical because it's true. I think women are, my parents were always really like, you can do whatever you want. You never have to get married. You never have to have kids. You can do whatever you want. But there's still like actions that refute those words sometimes. So then you're like, oh, maybe like there is a part of that is true. And like, I do need to conform to these certain things. And really, I think getting to a place where you are truly joyful in your life is such a radical thing to do, especially when I'm 37 and like being in this place where it's like, maybe you don't have like the things people tell you you should have, but you're actually cool.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
happy If anything, maybe you're actually happier than some of those people who are telling you that you should have the house, the partner, the kids, whatever, because you're making the right choices and not just like settling for the things that you think you're supposed to be doing. And I think it's just a more authentic way to move through life, which ultimately is healthier, happier.
Yeah, and you might as well. Like if you
Yeah.
can't change the circumstances, like embrace them. But I wouldn't even want to. Yeah, it's wild. It is. And I actually, yeah, just to feel younger in certain ways at 36 than I did
Mm.
a decade ago, you know?
Yes, totally. I so know what you mean by that. Yes,
People
I feel
say
that's
that. They say that about women in their 30s and 40s, like particularly in their 40s, their women say, this is the best I've ever felt. And I believe it based off of the experience I've had so far.
I do too. I was actually just saying to a friend of mine the other day, I was like, I'm excited for my 40s because even when I was a kid, I used to look at people in their 40s and think like, man, they're thriving. Because I
Yeah,
think it's kind of like you're past the point, hopefully, maybe where you're like struggling a lot financially. Maybe
right, right.
hopefully you figured out kind of what kind of career path you want to be on in terms of, and hopefully that hits multiple points for you in terms of like fulfillment and also financial like
Yeah.
security, regardless of whether you have a partner or not, probably amassed a great family group of friends and
Mhm.
feel really fulfilled by that too. And I also feel like an interesting space right now is like aging parents and like navigating that. And hopefully you've hit your stride and understand how to emotionally and physically like cope with those things as you kind of move into that space too, if you're lucky enough to still have your parents around. And but yeah, I've always kind of seen 40s as like a 40, flirty, and thriving.
I think it's so true. I know. And truly, I mean, there are some women I know in their 40s who look like they're 25 and and you can tell they feel that way. And it's super cool. One of the things I've also just gotten more comfortable with as I've gotten older, particularly in the last couple of years, I have felt a less of a need to be reactive in
Mm,
terms of communication and gotten more comfortable being proactive.
mm.
So I don't feel an obligation to respond to everyone who reaches out to me. I try to be polite if it's like a work type of thing, or if it's someone that, I know really well, but it's okay sometimes to not have, to not immediately respond to people or to just decide that it's just not something that serves you in the moment.
Yeah, reserving your energy is so important. It's so funny you say that. I was just listening to a podcast with this comedian I love, Eliza Schlesinger. Do you know?
Oh yeah. Mhm. She's also, yeah.
Same thing. She said,
Oh,
she was like, I had someone send me a really lovely message, right? And my initial instinct was to just like immediately write them back. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And it's this like ingrained female, like be nice to everybody sort
right.
of thing. But that still drains your energy as well. And like you're reserved for what you have for yourself and for the people closest to you. And it's like even it sounds weird to say you even need to create boundaries with seemingly good things, but that's still
Yeah.
really important too.
Yes, that's such a good way to put it because I have this incredible group, like it sounds like you do, of like my chosen family, like my best friends. And I haven't always prioritized them because I've been so reactive to people who are lovely and wonderful. And they're someone else's best friend, but they're going to get attention that because I feel like I have to be reactive and get something on the calendar with them instead of just being like, this is a lovely person, but I don't think this is like a soul person for
Yeah,
me. And
yeah.
so, sometimes I think the kindest thing we can do is not respond to people because I think sometimes when you do, there are just certain things that are very difficult to communicate like that. And so, yeah, just knowing that if you take care of the people who are your best friends, your family, that's what really matters. And don't let other things get in the way because none of us even have enough time for our most beloved people.
Yeah, I think that's a concept that's been really hitting me recently as the concept of time. Not to be like super heavy about it, but like we had a friend of ours like pass away early last week who was really young and she had been struggling with cancer for a few years and it was like on her third round of cancer and I had been thinking about it a lot with that. My mom is on her second bout of breast cancer and she's doing well, but it just really does make you think about like time and not even necessarily in like a morbid kind of way, just in like, okay, right now, I'm alive right now. Like, how do I want to spend these 5 minutes? Do I want to be on Instagram like answering DMs from people, or do I want to be like working on something that is going to propel me forward in life? Do I want to have a 5 minute phone conversation with my best friend? Do I want to check in on somebody who I know needs to be checked in on right now?
Yeah.
And just really being so intentional about that time, because you truly cannot get it back. And on just a more kind of like sassy, hilarious side of it, it's like I think my bullshit threshold has also like gone way down too. Like I just don't have time. I'm just exhausted by it, and I'm like, if I don't feel that connection, I'm good. Like we're good. You'll find someone else who like cares
Yes.
about you the way you deserve to
Yeah.
be cared about, and but it's not. It ain't me.
And it's okay for someone to make up a story about what it means. Like it's okay for someone to think
Yeah.
that you're a bitch or that you're, unkind or whatever it is, like
Yeah.
rude. I mean, it's like, yeah, at some point you're never, no matter how much you respond to every single person, you're still going to have people who think that about you. So, just as long as if the people who know you deeply respect you, that's all we can ask for,
Yeah, I agree, definitely. Thank you, firstly, for just like being vulnerable and telling us about the things that you've been sharing. And when I've been following you for a while and just saw you kind of like talking about these things, and just thought this would be such a great conversation to have. And I'm so grateful that you were open to having it. And, who knows how many people will listen to this, hopefully a lot, but hopefully it continues like your mission of wanting to just talk with more women and help more women. And I think telling our stories are the way that we destigmatize these
Yeah.
things that we've been trying to work through. And I've been doing that with, my miscarriages, and just being more like very matter of fact about it too. And I think when we share our stories of like our relationships, our health struggles, our mental struggles, it just makes it easier for ourselves, but for everyone else who needs to hear that too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that. It's like sometimes I'm like, oh, Larly, like, should you stay in your lane of food? But, that's first of all, I became an entrepreneur so that I could be the one to choose how I spend my time and what I share. And I think if there's one person that, you know, it really resonates with and that it helps. And I've had quite a few women reach out at this cross point of whether they want to leave somebody or move, and I always tell them I can't make that decision for anybody, and they should talk to a professional or decide that for themselves. But once people do decide to make a big choice, I think women really have a lot of fear around that. And so if I can help them in any capacity, I would love to, just for the one person or whoever it is. And yeah, I agree. I think unveiling all of these vulnerabilities is one of the best ways that we can heal and not feel alone. And I think we are definitely in a loneliness epidemic on so many fronts. So it's
Yeah.
just awesome. And thank you for having me, because this is really, talking about these things is really new. Like I've done very little of that. So thank you for wanting to go beyond some of the food stuff and talk about
My
that.
pleasure. Well, I mean, you're so much more than just a food professional, right? And I'm realizing we are like whole ass human beings. And like, I guess I felt that way about music too. I'm like, well, that's all I know. That's what I'm good at. That's what I've put my like Gladwellian hours into being like a professional at. Who am I to start a production company and like develop these TV shows and now start a podcast? Like, I have no journalism background. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But we are full people who have these experiences that inform the things that we do. And I think
Mhm.
by like sharing these other aspects of our lives, whatever we're, to whatever degree we're willing to kind of share them, just informs all that other work in those processes too. So I love seeing how your work is informed, and just appreciate you sharing who you are. And I'm just so happy that we connected. I've had such a nice time going to the antique show with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, how cool is that though? Because that's an example where it's like, oh, this is someone I just think I probably will connect with. And so I'm so glad that I have the time, because I, am not choosing other things or whatever, like that we were able to do that. So
Totally.
definitely we have a lot of, we're very different and very similar, which is
Yeah.
always really fun.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, can you tell everybody like anything else you're working on, or where they can find you and all of that good stuff?
Yeah. So right now I am writing my third book, which is basically going to be this recipes for a broken heart Heart. I don't know if that's going to be the name, something along lines of like a Broken Heart cookbook, taking all of this information, putting it in a book with a lot of single serving recipes. It's just even easier and more simple food than I've done in the past, but also a ton of my story, really going in depth with my story. I'm also about to launch a Cooking for One series of virtual classes, just 1 hour classes if you're somebody who wants to cook for yourself or have make single serving recipes, because I know that's hard and a big hang up for a lot of people. So yeah, I'll be launching that. You can follow me on Instagram and I'll be talking about that soon.
I love that. That's so fun. I mean, I'm not single, but I might take it anyway and just,
Single serving, yeah, it's like so nice to just sometimes, if your husband isn't home or whatever, and you just want to cook, make something for yourself, or you both want something different, to know how to have some like recipes in your repertoire for that, and to know how to do that is really helpful.
totally. Also, too, like he's a cyclist and he burns so many calories at the amount of food that he needs to eat sometimes, like for like lunch.
Yeah,
I don't need to eat that much foods. And
right.
so we often do end up like splitting up on meals a lot of the times. I'm like, if I
Yeah,
ate that, I would,
yeah. Oh, 100%. That's a whole lifestyle that is like next level. No, I know they burn like such an insane amount of calories.
like I burned 2,000 calories today. I'm like, I ate 2,000 calories. So
And I'm
cool.
like, I went for a 30-minute walk.
Yeah. Just really working super hard. And, sweat equity. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm just, again, thank you so much for today. I can't wait to just share your wonderfulness with whoever listens to this. And yeah, I really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been so nice getting to know Laura Lea more and finding friends as an adult that you just click with. That should be a future episode. First time making friends as an adult, right? Laura Lea was gracious enough to send us a special recipe just for First Time for Everything listeners. So here's what I'm going to do. This is going to be a good faith trade. I'm going to link the recipe in the YouTube video link, and you leave a comment on this episode either on YouTube or on any platform you're listening on, and subscribe to the show. I think that's a fair trade, and we're helping other people find out about us, right? So we can just grow our group of first-timers and have a great time. If you want even more mouth-watering recipes from Laura Lea, you can buy either one of her awesome cookbooks, Laura Lea Balanced or Simply Laura Lea, anywhere books are sold. You can also follow her on Instagram at Laura Lea Balanced to stay in the loop on new cooking classes and be the first to know when her new book drops. Our theme song is Living in a Rainbow by Royal Cinema, and First Time for Everything is produced by Sheilas Productions. Thank you guys so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late for your first time.